All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Victor Paredes Colonia. I am part of our asset management, outbound product management team, and I'm very excited to bring with you another ServiceNow live event, this time covering what we call the software license equation with an emphasis on Microsoft, Workstation, and server licensing. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And so before I do get started, I do want to mention a few announcements. The first of which, some of the information is privileged and confidential, so please bear that in mind. Secondly, some of the information or answers to the questions that we get today may be forward-looking in nature. A product is always moving, product features are always being developed, and things are subject to change. So again, please bear that in mind. All right, so a big welcome to everybody. This is another one of our ServiceNow live events. Our way of being as completely committed and dedicated to your success, helping all of our customers deploy, adopt, and achieve value faster with their investments in ServiceNow. This session is about getting a better understanding of the software license equation. This is a very standard type of use case where customers are aiming at being compliant with their license positions. So we'll dive in a little bit deeper with respect to that, with an emphasis on Microsoft. And to do that, I brought on board individuals from our ITAM outbound unit to help us with the conversation. So again, my name is Victor Paredes Colonia, and joining me is Michael Scugnamilio, also part of the outbound product management team. Srinivas Ramunjia is also part of our part of our asset management team, and he focuses primarily on software asset management. Srinivas, thank you for making the time. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Victor, for having me. Thank you.
And I know you're out in India, so again, thank you for making the time. I know it's relatively late.
No problem at all.
For the folks out there, we're going to talk about three main topics. First and foremost, setting up what we talk about with software license equation. What does that mean? It's all about compliance. So we're going to talk about what that means in particular with entitlements, your installations, and your effective license position. Then we'll look at that use case and how it relates to Microsoft, doing some examples related to Workstation and server licensing. And at the end, we'll close with some troubleshooting and helpful tips to help you get successful along the way. As always, please submit your questions and related feedback in the chat and QA form, and we will be getting to all the questions today at the end of the session. But bear in mind that when you are answering questions or delivering those questions, that they are focused on the topics that we discussed today. If you have any comments, use the chat so that you can share information with others. So without further ado, I want to get started with our first segment, which is the software license compliance equation. And I've spent a lot of time before working at ServiceNow conducting software license audits. I worked for one of our big four consulting firms that focus primarily on Fortune 500 software vendors, and what we were doing was auditing on their behalf. And so a lot of times customers were found out of compliance. And so what we want to do today is help our customers understand what that compliance equation is. So Srinivas, at a very high level, could you explain what the software license equation is and what's the goal of a customer insofar as that?
Yes, Victor. When you look at SAM, the heart of SAM is the business outcome to remain compliant with software licenses. So basically, the question that we want to answer is, how much do we own? And do we have any licensing risk? And how should we go ahead and mitigate that licensing risk? So that's SAM at a very high level. Now, coming to this compliance equation, this equation is, in very simple terms, a form to compare your entitlements with your software deployed so that the end result is effective license compliance position.
So that's great. And so I'm seeing here that at the bottom there are actions that you take, right? So if you have more licenses than you have installations, that might be indicative of something. But on the contrary, if you have less licenses than when you have installed, that's also indicative of something. Could you talk about those implications and what actions or what customers should be doing in those situations?
Yes, sure. When you are over licensed, it could be actually a good thing. It means that your team is growing and you probably need more rights, so that as users are getting added to your environment, you can cater for them. It could also be an opportunity to reconsider your maintenance renewal, so that in your next maintenance renewal with your publisher, you can think about reducing the number of licenses, so that based on your actual usage. So that's about, if you have, over licensed licenses. But the problem is when you are under licensed, because that represents an audit risk. And here, there are many options. One is, the customer could, or the organization could uh, pay for true up, which we don't want, or remove their unlicensed installs, or even consider optimization such as offsetting the true up using by determining the low usage software. So there are many options there in both cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so this is a very high level concept of the license equation. But if we were to take this concept and look at it from a SAM product perspective, how would that look like? How do these fit within our SAM engine, if you will?
Yes. So first comes your inventory data and your purchases, which is basically your entitlements that you have purchased. So these are all your purchases that you have made with your particular vendor, in this case, Microsoft. Then comes the raw inventory, which is your discovered software data, which includes ServiceNow discovery, third-party discovery, or even the API-related discovery, because you have got Microsoft 365, which is like a SaaS solution, and you could get your subscriptions to that. Next comes your content services, which includes normalization, basically a standardized way of representing your discovered data. And there is a huge research team at ServiceNow which handles that content library, so that whatever you get, whatever is discovered in your environment is normalized correctly with all the necessary details, like the end of support, end of life, etc. Then of course comes compliance, because using what you have uh, purchased with what you have deployed, you need to find out the ELP, or the enterprise license position. And for that, there are a number of licensing models. So ServiceNow applies all those licensing models, be it per core, per user, etc., so that you can get an exact license compliance position. And once you have that exact license compliance position, wherein you can determine whether you're compliant, what true up cost you have, etc., then comes the action mechanism, which is also known in ServiceNow as remediation actions. Now, these actions can be some things like, you could remove your unlicensed software. That could be one action. You could purchase more rights. That could be another action. Or the system automatically determines the low usage softwares, which you can remove from your system and basically offset your true up costs. So there are many actions that the system or the product automatically gives, which helps reduce the enterprise software spend, mitigate risk, help you optimize, and of course, detect your SaaS spends and unknown software spends.
Oh, that's great, Srinivas. I mean, I like the way that this slide comes together, because if I'm a customer, oftentimes I always ask, where do I start, right? And I think this is a nice display of, as a customer, where I should start. And that really is with getting in my entitlements into proper form into SAM, and then also bringing in my software installations. The magic behind SAM is that you're able to normalize and use the content service to get everything in a working order, so that you're not only able to create an effective license position, but you're actually able to use that enriched data to do other activities if you have more products in the platform, right? Things that you could do with ITOM, ITBM, ITSM, and et cetera. So I think this is a great way of showing where entitlements, installations, and the effective license positions sit in SAM. I'd like to move to the next segment, and I want to focus a little bit more now on Microsoft. So this is the main event. I want to understand how does this all work for Microsoft? Could you give an overview of Microsoft and how we support it today?
Yeah, Microsoft is, one of the leading publishers that are used by organizations. You're having all your uh, SaaS products like Office 365, M365, Dynamics 365. You have got your server softwares like Windows Server, SQL Server, etc. And ServiceNow does a good job in determining the compliance position for all these different types of softwares, be it client operating systems and applications, which includes project, Visio, server operating systems and applications like Windows Server, SQL, System Center, and of course, SaaS solutions like Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365. We have got a very good coverage on the SKUs. We can see that 192K unique flavors of PPNs or SKUs are there in our content library, which helps you to normalize the data in the most standardized manner so that you can get your effective license compliance position correctly. We support a number of licensing models. So, if you see Windows Server has got the per core with CAL, we support that. SQL Server has got per core licensing, we support that as well. Microsoft 365 has got user subscriptions, we support that as well. And not only that, we support many advanced use cases, because what we see from organizations right now is that, compliance is very important, but with compliance, cost saving is another very important factor that organizations expect from SAM solutions. And so, we take that into consideration. We support cost optimizations and recommendations so that the organizations can save useful dollars for softwares like Windows Server, SQL, Office 365. We apply, all those software assurance benefits automatically on the product. For example, license mobility and next version rights, so that the number of rights consumed are less. We provide recommendations so that you could move to the cloud, for instance, and we support great features like MLS imports, etc. So you can see that we support license compliance, optimization, and also complex use cases for server products and client products. So that's
great.
an overview for Microsoft.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I see that even in Microsoft, and this is a very common theme that we have with asset management, is you always want to crawl, walk, and run, or you want to do things in phases and increasingly complex use cases. So this is nice to see that even within one vendor, we support different levels of expertise or levels of use cases and complexity. So thanks for breaking that down for us, Srinivas. Thank you. Let's do an example of what it looks like to do workstation licensing. So I'm going to paint a picture, tell a story. What I like to do anytime I talk to customers is I really ask them, what is the business outcome you're trying to drive at with SAM? So one example might be, we want to remain compliant with our Microsoft project licenses so that we're able to reduce our audit risk. So that's a great business outcome. Okay, that's the goal. What do you do and what do you try to achieve within SAM itself? So what's the tech side of things? Okay, so as a SAM admin, I need to calculate the number of users that I have for Microsoft project and then compare that to my license count. So effectively, I'm comparing entitlements to installations. And if I do that properly, what I'm able to present to the business is a deliverable. And let's call that deliverable the effective license position, because it's in that snapshot in time that I can show what the license position is and even call out any opportunities for optimization. So this is the story. And I'd like to see from your perspective, Srinivas, how would you address a situation like this within product?
Sure, Victor. Microsoft Project is a great example. It's a project management product, which is very popular in organizations. And, it uses the per device licensing model, which is, another one of the licensing metrics that the ServiceNow SAM supports. Microsoft Project is installed on user systems, And what ServiceNow does are mainly two things. First of all, of course, it is able to determine license compliance, and also it is able to determine the low usage project users, so that when once the low usage product users are identified, those license either can be reclaimed from those users, or assigned to some other user, so that the organizations can save cost. And when you're determining license compliance, it could be that you are non-compliant. So ServiceNow provides remediation actions automatically out of the box, such as removing unlicensed installs, or purchasing rights, or, as I said, reclaiming those low usage softwares. So let's see that in action in the product. So we would understand that in a better way. So I'll share my
Let's do
screen
that.
real quick,
Yeah, please.
and let me know when you can see that screen.
Yes, we see it now.
All right. So this is our license workbench. As you can see that, we are on the Microsoft card, and, we support, as I said, all these different softwares, be it SQL, Project, etc. And because example is on Project, I am focusing on Microsoft Project here. And within Project, you can see that we have all these different versions and editions. So one of them is 2016. So assuming 2016 is the one on which a SAM manager wants to understand the license compliance. So the first, when you see it, you see that it's non-compliant. So as a SAM manager, I'm intrigued. What is the reason for that? So I can go into the license metric results. I can see that the license model, as I said, is per device. The licenses owned, which are my entitlements, is 130, and the licenses required are 156. That means I am deficient of 26 rights, and hence the true up cost is automatically getting calculated. Uh, so, so what ServiceNow SAM has done is that it has determined what all devices have got Microsoft Project installed, and it has compared that with the number of licenses available by the organization, and because there is deficiency, you see that you are non-compliant. Now, as a SAM manager, of course, I would want to know what is that entitlement which is there in the system. So I can go and to the entitlement section. I can see this entitlement. I can open it up to get more details about this particular entitlement. I can see that it is in use. This is a SKU number from Microsoft. So based on this SKU, using ServiceNow content, the system automatically populates all the details, such as what is the software model, what is the license metric, and all the other details are also here. For example, the downgrade rights. So, this gives information to the SAM manager that, this is the entitlement, and it's a per device kind of entitlement. Now, of course, I would want to know a bit more about project in general. So I can just go into the software model and understand that this software model for Microsoft Project is I seem some internet issues. Sorry for that. Yeah. So yeah, this is the product, and this is Project 2016 Professional. This is the next version of a project, and uh, other details such as what is the life cycle of the product, um, and if there are any downgrades for this particular product, that are also populated here. So all this is automatically populated based on content, and using all this different information, ServiceNow SAM is automatically able to determine the license compliance. Now, another important thing or very useful thing that is coming up here is the removal candidates. And you can see here that ServiceNow has automatically identified these removal candidates with low usage. And this helps the SAM manager to see why it is low usage. So that means that this particular user is is not using uh, Microsoft Project that much, and hence this particular license could be reclaimed by the organization. And once it's reclaimed, your true up cost can be reduced because that could be offset by the same. And then
Yeah,
you
so
can.
I was going to ask a question, Srinivas, if I may. So you showed us the entitlements and you showed us the software model. The software model itself is the one that is linking together, so to speak, the entitlements and the discovered software. Is that correct? And that's what's being used to assist in that reconciliation. And these are the results of reconciliation.
Exactly. So based on what you have owned versus what you have deployed, and the licensing model on that entitlement, ServiceNow determines how much you're compliant and whether you're non-compliant or not. And if you're non-compliant, as we just discussed, ServiceNow automatically creates these remediation options for you. So one of the remediation option could be remove unlicensed install. Um, so that you could just remove your unlicensed installs and become compliant. Or you could purchase those 26 rights and then become compliant. So all these options are available to the SAM manager so that they can take actions on them and then become compliant. So that was a bit about Microsoft Project. Now, if as a SAM manager, I would want to understand more details about how those licenses got consumed, because SAM managers would want to know more details about how ServiceNow actually calculated these license compliance. How did it assign these licenses to those devices? So in here you can see that all these devices have got Microsoft Project installed, and they're consuming just one write, and I can just click on it. As a SAM manager, I can determine what is the license metric. In this license metric is the licensing model. So in this case, it's per device, as we know, and you can see that this particular machine is consuming how many writes. Now, if I want to understand is project actually installed on it, you can actually see that Microsoft Project is installed on it. So this gives information to the SAM manager that, hey, I've got Microsoft Project installed. And for that particular device on which it's installed, it's consuming, this many writes. And so it gives more confidence to the SAM manager as to how ServiceNow SAM applied those licenses in the most effective manner, so that the organization can determine the license compliance. If they are non-compliant, create remediation options automatically so that action can be taken as well. So that's a bit about Microsoft Project.
Oh, that's great. And there was some comments I saw in the chat about it's worth mentioning to people that there's downgrade rights applied in the software model itself, right? So if you have licenses that are 2016 and those licenses can cover deployments that are 2013 or what have you, those licenses can be used for downgrade purposes.
Exactly. So as I said, our content is ever evolving. We have got a huge content library, and all these different data of downgrades, the next version that is coming, metric attributes, etc. They're all automatically added to the system, and then ServiceNow uses this content automatically to determine your license compliance.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Workstation. We just did. Let's talk about server licensing. So from a server licensing perspective, I'll paint the picture again. As a business, I want to have the outcome of being compliant with Microsoft SQL, again, to mitigate and reduce any audit risk exposure. So as an admin, again, I'll want to calculate the number of SQL Server instances deployed, and in some cases, count the number of cores being utilized by a product. whether it's on-prem or on cloud, so that I can compare those to the license count that I own. Very similarly, the deliverable that I want to deliver to my boss, to my company, is an effective license position that gives a snapshot of where our licenses are today with our installations and deployment of the product. Then from there, take action. So talk to us a little bit about that, Srinivas. How would we do that in the product?
Sure, Victor. Server licensing is, of course, more complex than the device or the per user licensing. And in this, because the cost is higher and the licensing models provided by Microsoft are much more complex than Workstation licensing. In this particular example, what we are seeing is Microsoft SQL Server. As we know, it's a hugely popular database software, and it is deployed on-prem as well as in the cloud. So in this particular use case, it's deployed on-prem in a cluster. And as you can see that, it's deployed, it's a SQL Server 2019 Enterprise with software assurance, which is a benefit by Microsoft. And it's deployed on about six virtual machines and on a cluster, which has got about 3 hosts. So, the various licensing rules of SQL Server are applicable here. And ServiceNow, the good thing that ServiceNow does is that when it applies licenses, it applies it in the most cost-effective manner. Of course, this is not a licensing rule book that I'm just going to inundate the audience with. But just to give a small background of it, if you take SQL Server Enterprise, Microsoft gives you the choice to license either the physical or the virtual machines. And for SQL Server Standard, you could only license it by the virtual layer. Now that effectively means that if you have got SQL Server Enterprise installations, you could license either by the VM layer, you could license the virtual machines, or just the host. And in this, what ServiceNow does is that it determines which is cheaper, with whether it's licensing the virtual machine layer or the physical layer, and applies those licenses automatically. In addition, Microsoft provides for some benefits when when the organization purchases a program called as software assurance. So if organizations have software assurance enabled, then there are many other benefits, like you get a licensed mobility benefit, unlimited virtualization benefit, and so on, which can reduce your licensing costs. So effectively, what ServiceNow SAM does is that it looks at your entitlements. It looks first whether you have software assurance or not. Then it looks at your installation base. It looks at your installation base and determines whether you have got SQL Server Enterprise or Standard. And then it combines both of them together to determine what is the cheapest way to license. So in this particular case, ServiceNow has determined that it's cheaper to license at the host layer because the number of rights required are just 12. And if you license at the virtual machine layer, you'll require about 24 rights. And hence that automatic license assignment happens at the host layer, and you basically determine your license compliance position. So that's about SQL Server deployment on-prem. We'll see that in the product in a short while, but let's move on to the next use case, and then we'll see both of these use cases on the product. And the next use case is on cloud. SQL Server is a very, very popular database software. It's deployed on-prem, but it's gaining traction on the cloud. And with something known as bring your own license, now organizations can use the existing on-prem licenses on public cloud platforms like AWS and Azure and so on. And ServiceNow supports cloud licensing as well. Now, just as I said, this is not a licensing rule class, but the rules on the cloud are different from the rules on-prem. And ServiceNow takes that also into consideration and applies those licensing rules for the cloud if it finds a deployment of SQL Server on the cloud versus what it finds on-prem. And when it's doing that on cloud, within the clouds also there are different licensing rules. So Azure has got something called as Azure Hybrid Benefit, which are some special benefits that you get if you deploy Microsoft SQL Server on Microsoft Azure. For example, if you just have one SQL Server Enterprise on-prem, you can consume four SQL Server standard cores on Azure. And that is like a huge benefit. So all those benefits are automatically applied as well on the cloud, so that you can determine your license compliance position on-prem as well as in the cloud on one single platform. What we have seen in other platforms is that cloud licensing happens in disparate tool, and on-prem licensing happens on another tool. And it's very difficult for organizations to combine both of them and determine what is the single license compliance position across my entire hybrid infrastructure. And what ServiceNow SAM does incredibly well is that it combines both of them. It combines the different licensing rules on-prem and cloud, and gives you that one license compliance position across your entire hybrid infrastructure. So that being said, let's move to the product. I will share my screen real quick and let me know if you can see that.
Yes, we're back on your screen.
All right. So again, the framework. The framework remains the same, which is you get your SQL Server software models here. You can see your different software models for 2019 Enterprise to 2017 Enterprise, etc. And you see your license metric results here. You see that in this, the licensing model is per core. We saw that in project is per device. So the different licensing rules of per core are applied. The licenses owned here are 50 and the licenses required are 52. Now, if I go to entitlements, I can see that I've got about 50 licenses, and I can see that I've got perpetual and software assurance. As I said, software assurance is a Microsoft licensing benefit. You get your unlimited virtualization, license mobility benefits, and a whole number of benefits if you use that. And organizations do have software assurance purchased from Microsoft, so they can mention that in this. And if I just open this entitlement, I can of course see more details about this particular entitlement. I can see that it is in use, the license metric is there, how many rights I've purchased, and so on. Now as a SAM manager, I would want to know how these licenses got consumed. I can see that 52 licenses are required and I'm non-compliant. So I can just move into the details about how these licenses got consumed. And I can see here that, this is the cluster which we just saw. And these are the devices. And because is virtual is false, it means that these are all hosts, which are the ESX machines. So what ServiceNow SAM has done is that it has automatically applied those optimization rules, and it is determined that licensing on the host layer is more cheaper, and so it has assigned these licenses for the same. Now, if I go into more details about how these licenses got applied, I can see that this is the per core licensing model. I can read more details about the per core licensing model. As a SAM manager, I would want to understand what is this licensing model all about. I can go into more details and understand what is the infrastructure which is consuming that right. I can see that this is that host. It has got one processor and two cores, but the licensing cores are 4. Now, why is that? And that is because the minimum licenses required per processor are 4. Again, this is automatically applied by ServiceNow through content services, and based on this metric attribute, ServiceNow automatically applies these licenses. So even though it is a one processor and 2 core machine, the number of licenses required are 4, because as per licensing rules of Microsoft, we require a minimum of 4 rights here. Now, I would also like to understand what are those virtual machines which have got SQL installed. So in this case, as we just saw, there are about 6 virtual machines um, on which SQL Server is installed. Um, and so if I want to understand more details about this particular virtual machine, I can go into this. I can see that what are the cores on these particular virtual machine. I can see what is the software that is installed, in this case Microsoft SQL Server. So in general, it gives more details to the SAM manager uh, as to how these licenses got consumed in that infrastructure. And then, if there's any host affinity rules, in this case, there are no, but if there were any host affinity rules, they would have also come up here. Now, another important factor that the SAM manager can look into to understand the infrastructure in more detail is the dependency view, which basically gives a dependency of all the infrastructure having this particular SQL Server deployed. So in this case, I can see that there is this particular cluster, and if I just load more, I can see that it has got um, this 3 different ESX servers on it. This is the cluster, and 3 different ESX hosts on it, and they have got all these different virtual machines running on it. So with the dependency infrastructure view, SAM manager can understand in more detail how these licenses actually got applied. And of course, as with everything in ServiceNow, you get remediation actions where you can remove unlicensed installs or purchase rights, and you can take this action. It opens up uh, reclamation candidate workflows on which you could basically take action on. So that is about on-prem licensing. Now coming to the next use case, which is cloud. I'll just quickly go over to cloud. Again, the same kind of infrastructure here. You can see that the license metric is per core. I own 130 rights. License required are 108, and hence I'm compliant. As a SAM manager, I understand that I've got perpetual with software assurance. And if I go into more details about how the licenses got consumed, I can understand more details about it. So you can see that these licenses are consumed across Azure and AWS machines across the entire infrastructure. And you can see these are the licenses required, and the licensing status says that license, so that everything is licensed and you are compliant. Notice one more special thing is the cloud special right. This is the Azure hybrid benefit, which you just talked about, which is you get some benefits if you have got SQL Server deployed on Azure. In this particular case, you can see that although this is a 16-core VM, it just consumed 4 SQL Server enterprise rights, and that is because of Azure hybrid benefit, which ServiceNow automatically applies. Again, all these details like what are the processors, what are the cores, what is the installations running on that particular VM. You can get all these details on this particular view. And of course,
this is great.
Yeah.
I think this is great because it helps educate not just the SAM manager, but if the SAM manager needs to explain, like you said, how were things calculated, this type of information here breaks it down, right? It gives the explanation of the license metric. It describes how it was calculated, and then it shows specifically which are the devices or machines or users, whatever license metric you're looking at, that is consuming the license. So I think this helps you verify that license requirement count. I like that.
Exactly, Victor. So this gives more information at the tips of the SAM manager so that they can understand how ServiceNow calculated the licenses, how those licenses got assigned. And of course, once they understand the details, then they can take the requisite actions if there are any.
Yeah,
So
and the
that was
last thing I'll
about,
say,
yeah.
yeah, that's about the server. I think the last thing I'll say about that, just to comment before we move to the next segment, is the way that you were able to describe it, that you can look at a particular product title and look at reconciliation just for that one product title gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you plan your work, right? I mean, you might have 20 Microsoft products that you need to get compliance for, but if you focus on, let's say, your first two and get those, squared away, you can then move down the list of all your other requirements and other products that you have, and continuously build on the work that you have just through the license metric that you have there in the screen.
Exactly.
But some things are not always smooth, right? I mean, sometimes we have to troubleshoot, and we need to make sure that we check ourselves on some things that are kind of leading practices so that you have good results in your reconciliation. Would you mind kind of going through what you would consider helpful tips for workstation licensing? And then we can go again and look at helpful tips for server licensing.
Sure. So the first one is, achieve license compliance in batches. So you can start with a few products first, like, Project, Visio, Microsoft 365, then go into more complex softwares like SQL and Windows. So that's point number one. Point number two is, focus first on your out-of-the-box publishers before focusing on the other more custom or complex products. We have seen in organizations that the majority of publishers are either Microsoft, Oracle, or or VMware. But if there's anything else, first focus on the out-of-the-box support and then move to the other ones. Which brings us to point number three, which is load your entitlements. Try to use PPNs as much as possible because that would automate many things: software model creation, downgrade rights, metric attributes, and so on. Number four is run discovery. Run discovery, check your software installations, check if normalization is happening correctly, and also check if you have got SCCM integrated or ACCB integrated into the system, which can give you software usage, and that will help you offset your true-up cost. Which brings us to point number five, which is to verify your software models. Try to make them version specific and edition specific so that you can create your entitlements for them. And then we come to point number six. Make sure your product is licensable, of course. So we can go to the point number seven then, which is check your suite component settings. Suites like Microsoft 365 and so requires your suite to be configured correctly. So ensure that your inference percentage, your mandatory fields are accounted for correctly. Point number eight would be, you would want to have certain software models excluded. If that's the case, specifically for passive SQL Server installations, for example, you can make LUM as false. Point number nine is utilize your install conditions, especially it is important in Visual Studio. And point number 10 is utilize allocations if you want to prioritize any particular licensing. So that was about
great.
Workstations.
Awesome. Yeah, let's walk through server software helpful tips.
Yeah, server software, as said, is a bit more complex. So again, but some of the things will be same here as well. Focus on
Sure.
on those products which are easy. For example, take SQL and Windows first, and then move to more complex ones. Focus again on the out-of-the-box support for SQL Server. Load entitlements first. Leverage PPNs as much as possible. Ensure your entitlements are set up correctly. Use PPNs. Ensure downgrades are there. Check run discovery. Check normalization. Verify your software models are correct. And then we can move to the next ones, which are the similar ones. Make your product licensable. set up properties, which could control your optimization settings, verify your true up, and see if your ELPs are correct or not. And then this is one important thing which we have introduced recently, which is health check. Um, it is released in Tokyo. You and it's a great product. A great product feature. What it does is that it can run through your existing configurations and determine if those configurations are correct or not. If not correct, it will give you a recommendation to correct that particular configuration, and you can basically create those tasks, assign it to individuals, and so on. So please check that out. It's soon to be released. So that's about it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really exciting. I am excited to learn more about that health check when it comes out in Tokyo. We'll probably have a session on that in the future. So let's break out for questions. I know some came in the chat form and some were also in the Q&A form. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A and we'll start going through those. Michael, do you want to call those out for us? And Srini, please address those questions as you see fit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with one from Melissa here. Does ServiceNow have a discovery agent we can deploy on all devices in order to meter application and software usage in runtime and frequency?
Yeah, so ServiceNow has released Agent Client Collector, ACCV as you call it, and it is specifically for this purpose. It's an agent. You can deploy it on your machines and servers and get software usage. And this is in addition to the ServiceNow discovery that we already have. So.
Okay, fantastic. Raghav wants to know how often are content service updated?
It's updated every Wednesday, every week. It's released, and the good thing is that customers don't have to do anything. It is automatically shipped to all instances automatically. So that's one thing which customers don't need to uptake. It is automatically shipped.
Okay, fantastic. Ed wants to know if can you speak to how software installs are gathered and how both discovered install models and entitlement models are normalized and mapped towards each other?
Yeah. So, it starts with discovery. Discovery discovers software's infrastructure, etc., and creates the software installs in the system. As soon as the software installs are created, ServiceNow content runs through, through the content. It runs through the installation records and normalizes them, which basically creates a standard form of those installs. On this, it uses the content that is shipped, and with this, it creates something known as discovery models, which basically show that if your software installs are normalized or not. And based on your discovery models, you can create entitlements and software models for those entitlements. And once you have your entitlements created and your discovery models are there, ServiceNow SAM reconciles both of these together so that based on the different licensing rules, as we just saw, whether it's per core or per user, and determines your license compliance position. So that's at a high level how ServiceNow SAM works.
Great, I hope that provides some clarity on your question there, Ed. Piyush is wondering what the approximate number of vendors that can be normalized using content services is as of now.
Yeah, to check this, probably we can answer this, through mail to Piyush. I don't remember the number of vendors. We support a huge number of vendors. So that number I don't have. I need to check with the content services team. I can say that for Microsoft, we support about 192K different SKUs. But the total number of vendors that we support is huge in number. And I can just get those numbers and send across if that's required.
Yeah. There's a lot of records that we have in the database, and it's continuously growing. There was a session actually that we had not too long ago about our content service and normalization. So I would say for those that have questions on that, please be on the lookout. We'll have that session again coming up in the future. but we do have that recorded and up on the community. So a lot of these questions related to content, you will definitely find it there.
Great. We have another question in the chat. With the content services, will models and catalogs also be updated?
If I understand this
Yes.
question, yeah.
Yeah. The answer is yes.
Okay. Fantastic. We have another question sent to me here that good suggestion to work on Microsoft in phases. How would you rank these environments in order of complexity or ease of success with SAM? Server licensing, O365, and workstation environment.
Sorry, I missed that question, Michael. Can you just repeat that?
No problem. So how do you rank the environments of Microsoft in order of complexity with SAM? The first being server licensing, the second being Office 365, and the third being workstation environment.
Okay, so I'll start with least complex to more complex. Of course, the workstation licensing is the least complex, which includes project, visual, etc. Then comes your subscription licenses like Office 365. And then comes the highest complexity, which is server licensing, which includes Windows Server, SQL Server, and so on.
Okay, awesome. Another question here, Microsoft and some other vendors have different licensing terms and requirements for server-based products with respect to non-production, high availability, and backup servers. Does SAM cover these licensing scenarios? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question. For backups and passive type of server licensing, we do support it. But I would not say that we support all the different use cases, because it's basically because we cannot discover that kind of infrastructure, like we cannot discover passive infrastructure, etc. So I would just say that we support many of the use cases there, but not in its entirety. And therefore, it's always advisable for customers to, have SAM programs in place in addition to the SAM product, so that they can manage license compliance effectively. But if there is any specific need for any specific license on backups, etc., just let us know. We will look into it.
Okay, awesome. Please keep the questions coming. It looks like we have one more question in the chat here. So for software discovery, do I need to configure any attributes to ensure I get complete discovery data? I noticed that I'm sometimes missing a version or edition. And do you have any advice?
Yeah. I think, the very first thing we would advise is to keep your if you're using, for example, ServiceNow Discovery, keep your ServiceNow Discovery and service mapping patterns application updated, because there are constant updates to the pattern. It's a store app, so make sure that you install the latest store app of those patterns and use that pattern so that you can get the maximum advantage. We are constantly adding more patterns so that you can discover more for your infrastructure. So that's, I think, one of the major things that one can consider.
Fantastic. And it looks like one last question is on the justification of usage, and if that is automatically populated in the platform.
Yeah, so what the good thing is that you can configure reclamation rules on ServiceNow, and basically you can say that if I don't use a particular software for, let's say, 90 days or 60 days, and that is configurable aspect, I want to classify that software as low usage, or I've not used this software for 3 times in the last 3 months. So those kind of rules you can configure, and based on what you configure, the reclamation rules work, and the low usage reclamation candidates that we just saw are created. So to answer that, it's based on the configuration that you have done, If you configure it, ServiceNow will respect that configuration and create those low usage reclamation candidates.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for those great questions. Back to you, Victor.
I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. And thanks for answering the question, Srinivas. And to the folks out there, really appreciate the questions. We have more documentation around this to help you all get successful, starting with training. There's software asset management fundamentals, which many of you probably have already taken or know about. But in addition to that, if you wanted a deeper dive into certain segments of our product and certain aspects like entitlements, normalization, discovery, and reconciliation, we actually have additional trainings out there on the learning community for you to access. And oftentimes those trainings are no more than 15 or 20 minutes long. In addition to that, we have other documentations, white papers, and guides. I'll call out just a couple of these. Managing Microsoft SQL Server licenses, a little bit of what Srinivas talked about and showcased today. Track and manage Microsoft software assurance using SAM. So there was a question in the chat about how we actually do that. Take a look at this white paper. It'll explain more in depth on how we track that. And then we talked a little bit about Visual Studio, or at least made reference of it. We have a white paper around how to manage Visual Studio licenses. And the last thing I'll say for everybody is, if you wanted to have a central place where you can start and get information, start with the community. This is our home. This is where we put a lot of our information, documentation, such as our Getting Started guide, where we summarize a lot of different steps on how to set up to success with SAM. And then we list out trainings as well as other resources and materials that I discussed today. We hope that you all enjoyed the session and found this very valuable. And we look forward to having you on more of these sessions in the future. Thank you and have a great week. We'll talk soon.